Okay, hello everybody. Thank you for joining our webinar 4 in our webinar series. And today we're going to be talking about careers in soil regeneration. But before we start, and we will allow a lot of our participants to join, we'd like to know where you're coming from. So if you can, in the Zoom window, down at the very bottom is the chat button. Go ahead and open up the chat window and just tell us where you're coming from. We usually have a very international audience, and we definitely love to see where folks are coming from. So already Britain, Germany, we've got a lot of the UK showing up, Mexico, lots of US, Africa representing. All right, Spain. Looks like we got quite a bit from Europe and quite a bit from North America and South America coming in too. Fantastic. Always love to be able to see how many folks from different parts of the world that come into play. Oh, we got somebody from Morocco. Awesome. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. Adam, if you can go to the next slide, please. Let's talk about the webinar series that we've got going on. So today is the 4th webinar in our webinar series. And there are also for you to have the ability to go back and look at all the replays. And I would definitely suggest if this is your first webinar that you've attended in this webinar series, definitely go back and check out webinars 1, 2, and 3. Okay, and again, today we're going to be talking about careers in soil regeneration. So next slide, and some webinar rules of engagement. Just to keep the noise in the background to a minimum, we have all the participants besides the panelists in muted mode, so you won't be able to hear background noises. And also, we're asking for you folks to be able to ask questions of us panelists. And you can find the Q&A button at the very bottom of the screen. And I'll have a slide which I'll go a little bit more detail in this. But if you want to start posting your questions into that Q&A button, we have moderators that will go and choose the questions, and we'll have the panelists go ahead and answer them. And also feel free to use the chat window to converse with other participants in the meeting. So in today's webinar, our kind of topics for the day is just some general introductions, just so you know who the panelists are. And then we're going to have a presentation from Keisha Wheeler and Casey Ernst from Catalyst Biome. And then we're going to have Nick Tomasini is going to give us a small talk about his work that he's doing. And then myself, Brian Vagg. And we'll get into kind of where we came from and how we got to where we're at. And then we'll have a fairly lengthy Q&A session, about 45 minutes long, to be able to answer the questions that you guys post in the Q&A. We're expecting that today's webinar is going to go for a total of about 2 hours. Okay, next slide. I think my internet connection might be slow. So give me a second while my screen catches up. All right, so our panelists for today. The reason why all of you folks are here is to hear from Dr. Elaine Ingram. She has been a pioneer in this field. I know for all of us that are panelists today, she's been highly influential in the work that we do. And we owe a lot of her graciousness and sharing her knowledge to be able to help support the things that we do out in the field. We also have Nick Tomasini from Humankind, Oregon. He's a soil food web consultant and also an organic inspector, and he's based out of Oregon. We have Keisha Wheeler and Casey Ernst from Catalyst Biome. They're both soil food web consultants, and they also produce compost, and they're based out of California. We have Dr. Adam Cobb, who's my co-host for today. And he is a employee at the Soil Food Web School. He's a content creator and a science communicator. And he's based out of Oregon. And then we have myself, Brian Vagg. I own a company called Sprouting Soil, and I'm a soil food web consultant. And I also do help mentor students as they come through the program. Okay, next slide, please. And sorry, folks, I have a little bit of delay. So before we actually get started into the presentations, what we'd like to do is do a quick poll. And so the poll is basically going to ask this question of you folks. Which the following best describes you? Are you coming from this as a farmer, rancher, or grower? Or are you coming in from a person that's looking for more of a career in doing soil regeneration and the different soil food web practices? All right, so we'll let that poll go ahead and run for a few more seconds behind the scenes. And thank you very much for actually answering our questions. All right, next slide. So again, just a reminder, as we go through the presentation, there is the ability for you to post your questions, to have them selected to be able to be answered by the panelists. And in the Zoom window at the very bottom is a Q&A button, and go and post your question there. Please don't try to post your question in the chat window, because that's more for general discussion and your question might get missed. If you definitely want to have the panelists answer your question, please go ahead and put it in the Q&A button. All right, next slide. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to Keisha and Casey to talk about the catalyst bioamendments. Take it away.
Hey, I'm Casey Ernst. Keisha Wheeler to my right here. Yeah, we are Catalyst Bioamendments. You can find us online at catalystbioamendments.com and Instagram at Catalyst Microbe Adventure or the Soil Microbe Library. Yeah, we're a small composting company based out of California. Next slide.
All right, so where we got started, we found Elaine back in, must have been 2010. We were reading Teaming with Microbes, the gateway drug to soil biology. And, we were so inspired by those few paragraphs that we started making compost teas and extracts for our own gardens. And we were seeing, amazing results without having the microscope. And we decided we wanted to just, really get our hands dirty and, spend all of our time focusing on growing plants, on learning how to regenerate soil. And we realized it's really expensive in the US if you want to just take time off to study. So we decided to go to South America, to Ecuador in 2011. And we went there just, with the inspiration to get started on all these, different projects. Next slide, please. We ended up landing at this permaculture farm that was really, really, really high up in the mountains. The last slide was actually a picture from our house that we built. And so when we were there, we were hosting people from all over the world and teaching them how to live off grid, how to grow their own food, learning or teaching permaculture systems. We had a reforestation project there that we worked on. It was 80 acres. We had a food forest, and a lot of what we did, composting and everything, was education based. So we were always teaching.
We were also very into animal husbandry and just kind of focusing on the land through trying to regenerate the land through rotational grazing, using our animals to, kind of eat back areas, but not letting them overgraze that, kind of rotating them through these 80 acres all over the hillside. And also teaching people and making cheese. We'd milk the goats every single day. We just it was a super large, there was 15 people or so up on a mountain, just kind of putting regenerative practices to work.
Yeah, so I guess the last little bit, we were working with soil, building and working with soil, even plastering. It was just soil, all areas of our life. But we began to see some inconsistencies in what we were doing. Sometimes our compost was working really well, providing us with a lot of food, and it was just obviously, creating abundance. And then other times, not so much. So what happened was we started to realize this must be the microbes, that Elaine was talking about in the book. So we found the Soil Food Web School, and we started to study while we were in Ecuador. So we would go walk down into town, get on the computer, and get through our studies every day. Casey and I worked together, and we would, at the end of every lecture, just sit down and kind of debate over what we thought Elaine was trying to say. And so we ended up coming back after we graduated from the foundation courses. We actually came back to the US to try to work with Elaine in person. Next slide.
And so, yeah, we kind of, after, getting through the foundation courses, we really kind of just inserted ourselves into Elaine's life. We kind of forced our way into helping on one of her workshops. But then that kind of ended up helping us to find our community in the microbe world. We ended up meeting our business partners at the first workshop that we went to and helped Elaine at. And then we ended up actually hosting workshops with Elaine.
Yeah, so you could see actually in these pictures, I put this silly picture in the corner just to really show how much fun this group is. You can see Brian there making a funny face. We got involved with the Sierra Soil Biology Association, which is a bunch of students and microbe lovers that were in our area. And it was in one of those classes that we met our business partners. And, you know, we had a lot of different samples at the workshop, and we were looking at sample after sample. Some people were actually creating what they said was biocomplete compost. And under the microscope, we saw that wasn't necessarily true. So we all kind of realized if we wanted to do the work of consultants, if we wanted to have application businesses, if we wanted to do anything with regenerative agriculture, we needed compost to do it. So next slide.
And so we started our composting company back in 2018. We started like very, very small. We thought our eighth of an acre was something that was going to be like, oh, we're going to produce so much compost out of this space. But it was, you know, it worked well because it was small enough scale to where we were actually able to pay attention and source good material, clean material to kind of work into our composting regime.
Yeah, so we spent the time, like you can see in picture 1, that little bitty windrow, it's probably 20 feet long. We were on a flat, like gravel and clay pad. We hadn't learned yet about solidifying our pad and learned about how our processes work. So I guess it was over 3 years that we, you know, spent all of our time day to day at the compost lot. It looked like, you know, us gathering materials with pitchforks, us doing all the watering, all the turning, all the construction, keeping all the data, just really, really spending a lot of time understanding our processes, getting to the point where we could reliably create a biological inoculum over and over and over again. You can see on the big screen there, that's our new lot now. We've more than doubled our size. We've learned about how to operate on our pad and keep it from being too muddy to work in the winter. We've increased our window size up to around 180 to 200 feet. We've also doubled the size of our piles and increased our turner. So there was a lot of growth over those 3 years. Next slide.
And now it's nice, you know, our jobs have kind of evolved a lot. We started out just being like the labor workforce of our own company. But now we're actually able to start hiring on employees. And now we're doing a lot more push on spreading this stuff out as far and wide as we can. We've reduced bag sizes, so it's a little bit more available to people. And we've been able to get our product into a few stores as well. And so, yeah, we're just... it's just been a complete change and complete shift throughout the years of like what this job actually looks like and how it's kind of evolved into the future.
You can like mark our words on this one. Those pictures on the right are us hand bagging the compost. We still have not found a way to use a normal bagging machine to bag biocomplete compost. It's so sticky and just such a different texture than most of the compost you come across. We're hoping that when you guys see us on a webinar in a year or two, this will be our old slide and we will have a new bagging machine that we have created that does all this work for us, so we don't have to hand bag our product anymore. Yeah, so it's a lot different. We've started new businesses now. If you go to the next slide, please. You can see now we've got it broken down into 3 or 4 different jobs that we do now. There's catalyst bioamendments that we produce all of our compost for our consulting and our tea and extract application business, and we also have our lab. So at Catalyst, we're basically working on refining our training materials, on our quality control, packaging, public speaking, customer relations. You know, we're growing into a new space, and the space that we left is now being filled by people who are very passionate about their work.
Our consulting company, actually, we spend a lot of time out in the field. We're currently right now down in Los Angeles, which is like 600 miles away from where we actually live, on consulting jobs. So we actually end up doing a lot of traveling, working on the road. You go into a place and you just like look over their entire system, and you have to go through and make modifications to the equipment they already have and just see how we can work these practices into their current practices, and so that the transition period isn't so rough and expensive on the companies that we're coming in to teach. And yeah, we end up doing a lot of different trials, a lot of microscope work, a lot of soil samples and assessments. We even go through, and Keisha's been getting into microscopic photography. Excuse me, I don't know why that wouldn't come out. And she's actually been paid for it a few times. It's kind of an interesting side job that just came from nowhere or came from this world. And yeah, it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, so I mean, you can see there's so many different aspects to this job. You start going through the Soil Food Web program, you start out with your foundation courses. We jumped ahead of the game by starting a compost company that soon, but we had a lot of practice. And there's so many different areas that you can work in. And as we've traveled through the school and taken all the different programs and been involved, we've just worn so many different hats. And like Casey says, just creating jobs that I didn't even know exist, like videography with a microscope is so fun. Some people will send me their samples and then I actually get paid to just, take pictures of their microbes and send it back to them and let them know what that is. And it's so fun. And a lot of what I love about the school and love about this work is it is really undefined. This is an area where you can create your own reality. I'm sure that we haven't unearthed all the jobs that are possible yet. No pun intended there. But yeah, so I mean, if we're talking about like what is advice that we would give, I'm in two ways of thinking. One is it might be smarter to focus on just one thing. You can see we are all over the place. I cannot settle on precisely what I want to do. I want to do it all. So, there's the way of just setting to it and going about one thing and getting really, really good at it, like we did with the compost. Or, you can kind of do what we do and just jump all over the place. You got any good advice?
I think for advice for people getting into this is just find your community. A lot of people in here that start the school. I know we have a bunch of clients in like the Midwest and they feel like all isolated and on an island all by themselves while they're going through the school. But you actually reach out and put that message out there and you'd be surprised at how many people all over the place are actually interested in this, already in the classes actually, and just are there to be with you, because it's really hard to sit on an island by yourself and do the work. So I would suggest getting out there and just finding community around it.
You do get a lot of community when you go through the school. I mean, this obviously that photo, the silly photo we put up, like those are all people who are involved. And even recently we had a client who he moved from California and just needed some support. And like I put up a post about it online, and before you know it, someone from the school wrote me and provided me with a bunch of ideas of people that might be interested. And now they have Soil Food Web groups going on in North Carolina just after that action. So make sure and remember to reach out and let people know what you need. And often it just comes right around. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. I think that's it.
Okay, thank you, Keisha and Casey. That was awesome. I love hearing your stories, and it brought me back to when we took that picture of the Sierra Soil Biology Association. That was fun. Okay, we're going to move on to Nick. So Nick, you want to take it away?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, and thanks to all the listeners today. My name is Nick Tomasini. I operate Humankind Oregon LLC. I have been in business since about 2016. Originally, it was splitting time between consulting and continuing work as a National Organic Program inspector, independent inspector, contracting with a couple of different agencies, such as Oregon Till Certified Organic. My main region of focus is the Pacific Northwest, but I have clients from Montana to Oklahoma that I do intensive on-site work with. And I also do a lot of remote consulting and just testing in general. You can check out more at www.humankindOregon.com. I also have an Instagram feed at Humankind Oregon. So I didn't meet Elaine back at this time, but I was very aware of her, and I had the Compost Team Manual going back to about 2003. I was at Oregon State. I think she was at Oregon State until about 2001. And I was in the Organic Growers Club and just experimenting with compost tea, with compost, with organic methodologies. And, I was in agriculture and studying agriculture and horticulture at the time. And, learning a lot there, but certainly not getting the curriculum that I really yearned for, which was exploring more of what was going on with soil biology and organic methodologies in general. So, she had Soil Food Web Inc. in Corvallis, Oregon, which is where Oregon State is located, and started getting some compost there, applying that to different garden plots, seeing a lot of success, having some initial aha moments with just going through that curriculum and experiencing using those types of methodologies, and specifically her compost at that time. From there, I went and worked for Oregon State University Mid-Columbia Agricultural and Research Extension Center as a research assistant for a soil scientist, mostly working with cherry and apple and pear. And there was a little bit of microbiology testing going on within some of the research we were doing there, but not much. I did a short stint as an IPM field scout for a very large farm in the Willamette Valley, growing corn, pumpkins, brassica, marionberry, blueberry, and also working in their quality assurance microbiology lab, basically doing plate counts to make sure human pathogens weren't coming out of any of the lots that were being processed at that facility. From there, I moved, we were out in Hood River, basically the Columbia Gorge, and I was an organic fruit and vegetable grower there. We grew apples, diversified vegetables, and we were trying to apply the soil food web methods there. But I think one thing I was running into, we were very happy with our produce and the business we grew, and so were our clients, our CSA members, our restaurants we sold to, et cetera. But there was just something missing, and I wanted to know a little bit more there. I was trying to use these soil food web principles, but I was not able to use a microscope effectively at this point in time. And later on, I realized that most of the compost we were using was just bacteria and not much else. And so that's why we weren't necessarily seeing the same results we saw, in our gardens and in the Growers Club in college. From there, I became, that's when I started doing my inspecting about 2012, 2013, became an independent inspector and contractor for National Organic Program. And about 2015, 2016 is when I started doing some more consulting, mostly on the agronomic side of things, using plant and animal-based inputs, some minerals, using the Albrecht method for that. And then went through the classes in about 2016, learned how to use the microscope, and that is when I had my next aha moment. It took me a long time to find material that had all of these organisms that we were after: protozoa, nematodes, fungi, bacteria, just a very diverse array of organisms. And once I did, I started applying that to gardens and some of my own personal space again. And that is when I really saw the benefit that I had seen before when I was in college, and decided to continue on with the classes and continue into the consultant training program. And as of now, I haven't been doing the inspection work since about 2019, and I've been consulting full time since then. And so I thought I'd throw just some of our mission up here: amplify soil microbiome awareness and methodologies, expand availability of biocomplete compost. In my opinion, it's very scarce. It is central to the regeneration, the restoration, and the remediation work that so many realize is so important. And there's just not a lot of it out there. I do work with we make a little bit of our own vermicompost here in Oregon. I'm partnered with somebody else on that. I have a few clients where I consult with them on composting. One of them is getting very close, if not already within that realm of biocomplete now. And of course, have used catalysts, bioamendments, composts on many projects in the past as well, which is excellent compost. And then finally, just to regenerate and remediate as much land as possible. Next slide, please. So some of the testing and data that we use for our various projects, first and foremost, direct microscopy A little bit of epifluorescence, microscopy, staining, although there hasn't been a lot of buy-in there. I think there will be as time goes by. We are doing a little bit of ITS, internally transcribed spacer, genomic testing. We're outsourcing that. So we're getting some fungal ID, and we're getting some bacterial ID as well through 16S genomic testing. And that has been really illuminating, to be able to put some of those species next to the direct microscopy data that we generate. And yeah, there have been some more aha moments there as well. So we started out just kind of looking at compost that we were using. I wanted to characterize the fungi and bacteria that I was seeing in these very diverse and biocomplete composts. And yeah, just there's definitely an array of things happening there that I didn't expect. For example, the difference between a thermophilic compost and the fungal makeup of a thermophilic compost versus a vermicompost. The worms bring in some very interesting fungi with their microbiome, and luckily it was well covered in the scientific literature, so I could go and cross-reference what was going on with those particular species we were seeing. And yeah, like I said, that was a big aha moment. I think we'll do more of that testing, at least on the compost, so we can identify where a given source of compost might be best suited to any given project we work on. Soil chemistry, still look at mostly a Melic-3 test and then soluble nutrients. Have been, working on through Acres USA is really where I started with all that after college and looking at the Albrecht method, but have really been drawn into the nutritional side of a lot of my projects, and for various reasons, but one of the big ones is that if I did not intervene on the soil chemistry side or put my 2 cents down, then perhaps it was, what was going to otherwise happen would be detrimental to the soil biology work and the proliferation of those organisms that we're implementing. So I do keep a pretty close bead on what's going on there. It does become part of the program. There's certainly some compromise that happens on that front, but we've also been able to find some synergy between managing soil chemistry and nutrition and soil biology. And so leaf extract analysis, or SAP analysis, as many know it, is another tool that we use to sort of verify what's going on with our biology, what's going on with our soil chemistry, and then what's actually happening inside of the plant at the end of the day. And then, of course, field observations, soil structure, we use a penetrometer. A spade can be a very, very powerful tool, just digging some holes, looking at soil structure, looking for hard pan, looking for compaction, that kind of thing. Weeds and plants we might see on a new project or on for any given field that we may be working on, and what they can tell us as bio indicators of what else may be going on in the soil. And then, of course, what kind of insect life and what kind of pest and disease we're seeing within that production, surrounding that production, et cetera. So that's kind of the testing and data that we use primarily to paint a big picture in the beginning, to track data and progress over time. And then, of course, plant performance needs to agree with, seeing optimal data coming from these other testing platforms. So for consulting, transition and regeneration programs are a big part of it. A lot of times we're working with growers who are either trying to make that transition from conventional, or perhaps they're already organic or certified organic, but they want to be more biologically focused. And so it can take a little bit of time to look at their current management program, and then where we can make changes, things that might be able to stay and things that probably need to go so we can do what we're trying to do. Do a lot of on-site work, a lot of travel, compost extract and compost tea application, a lot of composting consulting as well these days, inoculum applications, just trying to formulate what's going on with our compost extract on any given project, extracting that initial amount of compost into solution, taking a sample of that, looking to see what kind of numbers we have for the various groups we're focused on. If we're not quite where we need to be with that extract, we extract a little more, we test it again, but that's the way we formulate on site. And that's the way we formulate for any new lot of compost that we're working with. We have a lot of field trials going on where we look at plant performance, we're looking at soil health, and we're looking at pest and disease issues often up front. I do receive a lot of calls because there are problems, and not always because somebody just wants to make a change, but hey, we've hit a wall here, or we've tried everything there and we need a new approach. We'd like to see if you can come out and take a shot at it. So again, agronomic recommendations, plant and animal-based inputs, a little bit of Albrecht method mineral balancing in there as well. And then we've been doing some product R&D over the last couple of years too. So compost tea brewers, compost tea kits, biostimulants, different equipment that people are wanting to optimize for a biological farming approach. Next slide, please. Some crops, I just kind of throw a mishmash of pictures in here. Some crops and projects that we're currently working on. We've got blueberry, wine grape, a couple different wine grape growers, hay, pasture, and grazing operations, working with 3 of those, working with an orchard that has some different tree fruit, working with a new hazelnut grower just recently. We work with cannabis hemp. I've got growers in 5 states. So those states that are licensed for recreational production, work with some nursery, work with some permaculture swales. We don't actually design or build these swales, but we come in and inoculate them and plant cover plants on them and just kind of try to solidify that loose earth after the construction of those swales. And then a lot of compost clients as well these days. Next slide, please. I thought I'd share just one trial we're in the middle of right now. We're just entering year 2. Blueberry, a couple different trials on a couple of different farms. Each one is applying 4 applications of compost extract injected through their drip lines. The scope for one is they have a big Phytophthora issue. So we're trying to fix some of the conditions that we identified in the soil, some of the compaction, some of the cultural management that was going on with like 6 inches of really fresh sawdust being applied on a regular basis, high amounts of gypsum up to like 3 tons to the acre. And so we kind of addressed that first and foremost. And another farm, we ended up treating the entire 40 acres instead of having a treatment control block like we did on the Phytophthora farm. But the early results you can see there in sort of the top middle of the screen. We're seeing, so this is 4 different blocks across the 40-acre farm, and this is just the difference in yield. So the relative yield increase from 20 to 21. And so as you can see, it's an array, but we're up at the top end there at 115% and 84% yield increase after 1 year of management. Next slide, please. We're doing some several different wine grape projects as well, some existing that have some big problems and some new developments too. So we got to get in there and get our mycorrhiza in there, inoculate accordingly, have some say in the agronomic applications that were made there in the very beginning, and then formulate some of the cover crops, which unfortunately I don't have a picture of that. So all you see is the bare soil there with new planting tubes on the far right. So we do, with some of the existing vineyards that we're working with that have some issues, we are working with them on nutrition management to pull back on some things and make it a little more precise. So, we discovered that a lot of things that were just being applied sort of indiscriminately on an annual basis through SAP analysis were not deficient, and in some cases actually excessive. So we sort of reformulated that nutrition program for them and saw some pretty good results. In some sections of one of these vineyards, grapevine red blotch virus, or red blotch disease, as it's often called, is an ongoing problem. You can see the bottom left photo there, that really red vine. That is like a very extreme case of red blotch disease there. But I think within viticulture, it is regarded as something, once you can't get rid of it. It just continues to spread, and they had already ripped out a bunch of acreage. And so now we're working on that soil management, those cultural management tenets, getting our extract, our compost out there, getting our cover crops in there, a diversity of cover crops, keeping them in play for as long as possible till they need to get in there with their harvest, and making compost from the pumice that they produce in the wineries. And we're seeing some good initial results there, but I hope to be able to share more of that over the next year or two. Next slide. Oh, and then composting. So working with 2 different commercial composters, and then I threw some, one in Oklahoma, one in California, and then I threw some other pictures up there of just some different piles we've made with clients. So when they are willing, we absolutely recommend that clients and for other various projects, produce their own compost, especially if they have a waste stream that they already need to deal with. So I work with some grazing operations. As I mentioned, they have a lot of manure, particularly in the spring, because their animals have been in the barn over the winter. And so we compost that, and that goes back out onto the pastures. The pumice gets composted either in the fall or the spring. In the Pacific Northwest, I like them to dry it down, and then we do it in the spring, and we just kind of run into some colder, wet temperatures, and it's hard to keep our heat. So, but yeah, there's, I've experienced and worked with a lot of different composting systems now, and the soil food web approach, a lot of these operations that we come into and we don't see a lot of like fungal activity or diversity in general, it's relatively simple adjustments that need to be made to the recipe and the management protocols to change that in short order. And so that's what we work on most of the time with these commercial composters. And then you can see that one picture where there's actually some aeration going on some static piles. And they're using a bouncy house blower there to aerate those piles, which is very, very interesting. And they had a couple positions. It was very foreign to me, but I put it under the microscope, and they were actually doing a very good job from the beginning. And so we're making some recipe adjustments there, and just trying to bring down some bacterial biomass and boost that fungal biomass a little bit. But I was seeing 500,000 or 600,000 amoeba per gram of that compost right off the bat. So they are taking some soil food web classes now and have sort of adapted what they learned there to, I think, the Peter Moon O2 composting methodology, if anyone's familiar with that. And I was just really surprised and impressed with the product they were able to produce in that manner. Next slide, please. So a little bit of advice, just based upon my experience in this realm. We accomplish more together than as individuals. Confer and partner with your peers often. It has just been, from the very beginning, so valuable to be able to talk with people like Brian and Keisha and Casey and Scott and Sarah and so many others within the Soil Food Web organization, certainly bouncing ideas off one another, and just kind of opens up a whole conversation and new possibilities and different inroads for research and just kind of the way we think about this stuff. So certainly create that community. I want to echo what Keisha and Casey said there. It's important to have that community and just to have that support. And then make time to read and understand emerging microbiome science. It's an accelerating field. And honestly, I don't have a lot of time to sit down and read scientific publications in the spring, but in the wintertime, I do try to make more time to sit down and learn and see what's new. And once in a while, every few years, something new comes about that we might be able to implement into our what we do. as consultants. Familiarize yourself with conventional farming methodologies. You may encounter them often. You will be, if you are doing some consulting, you'll be explaining things from your point of view, and often you will meet, maybe just some questions about, well, this is the way we do it and why we do it. How do we reconcile these things? And so it's just important to have somewhat of a working understanding of, if it's a given crop, what some of the cultural controls are, what some of the regional inputs might be that they're using, et cetera. So do some research there. And then be patient in getting your business off the ground. It took a couple of years. I wore that consultant hat for a few years, that inspector hat for a few years longer than I actually had anticipated, because it does take some time to get your business going. So find an area of focus within this Soil Food Web educational platform and get really good at that, as Keisha and Casey said and have done with their composts, and then build upon that. But choose an area of focus, know your strengths, focus on those strengths, definitely work on your weaknesses. But I think over time, we all build upon where we started. And like Keisha and Casey, I'm doing a lot now, and probably a lot more than I thought I was going to be doing a couple of years ago. So take your time. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. You can give me a call or shoot me an email at hello@humankindOregon.com if you want to chat, or if you have any questions about anything at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. That's great. I loved your section on data too. It's one of those things where, it's not just one tool we rely upon. There's a lot of tools, a lot of data that we have to be able to analyze, and then use that data to help us make decisions and provide good guidance to our clients. So
right.
It was really cool to see that. Yeah, awesome. Okay, so before I actually give my presentation, let's go ahead and talk about the Springboard Plus offer. So we did extend it for a few more days, and the offer ends on April 28th. So coming up really, really soon. This is the biggest savings that we have for 2022. It's a total of 47% off. And so typically $5,000 is down to $2,900. And we're going to go ahead and see a short video that's going to talk about the promotion that we're running. So Adam, if you want to go ahead and kick that video off.
Spring is in the air, and there's never been a better time to launch your career in soil regeneration than right now. With the Springboard Plus offer, you can register for the Soil Food Web Foundation courses for just $2,900, and you'll get 2 free bonus courses, saving an incredible $2,600, or 47% off the regular fee price. This is guaranteed to be the lowest price through the rest of the year. Whether you're a farmer, rancher, market gardener, or just someone who's passionate about the planet looking for a way to make a big impact, this could be for you. Here's what some of our students are saying about the Soil Food Web training program.
I find that this information hasn't been taught to me, and I had to get off my high horse. And even though I have a PhD, I feel like I'm totally undertrained.
I feel like I'm learning more with this program than I have with in-person classes in the past.
I've taken classes on microbiology before, but this course really makes a difference in the way that a story is put together that unveils the relationships between plants and all those beneficial organisms that we just cannot see without a microscope.
If you're looking for something that does a deep dive into soil biology, this is it. It is just an incredible knowledge base and is really relevant to what's going on right now in the world.
Without it, the only way I could have gained this knowledge would have been by dropping my life and going to graduate school. And that just wasn't realistic for me. But Soil Food Web has made it possible for me to build a meaningful career in land restoration.
I was really nervous. I was going to put quite a bit of money down and not get that bang for my buck. But once I actually got into the FC courses, I was incredibly impressed with how professional they are and actually the level of education you receive. This is the career path I've been looking for in the biological community, and I was having trouble finding.
Remember, with the Springboard Plus offer, you're not only getting the foundation courses for $2,900, but you're also getting these 2 free bonus courses. The Introduction to Permaculture is an 18-lecture course that covers a wide array of permaculture principles and themes delivered by Graham Bell, Chair of Permaculture Scotland and longest-serving permaculture teacher in the UK with 31 years' experience teaching on 6 continents. Permaculture is a regenerative design approach that can be applied to just about anything, from water management, growing systems, dwellings, and much more. The Soil Sponge Regeneration Workshop is delivered by educator and author Dee Dee Pershaus. This 5-session course is all about regenerating the soil sponge for flood, drought, and wildfire resilience. It builds on the successes of innovative land managers around the world who are saving huge sums in damages from extreme weather events and crop diseases, while restoring the dignity and profitability of farming. Dee Dee teaches participatory workshops both in person and online, helping to show the nested relationships between soil health, human health, water cycles, and climate resiliency. Sign up for these amazing courses and join the soil revolution today.
All right. Thanks, Adam, for running the video. And now we're going to go ahead and hear from me about my soil food web journey. So if you can go to the next slide, Adam. All right, so my journey, how did I come about the soil food web and actually become a consultant and doing the work that I'm doing? And I kind of laid out some of the questions that I want to be able to kind of tackle here. So when did I discover Dr. Elaine Ingram and the soil food web approach? What inspired me to actually come and do this work and continue to do it? What was it like being a student? Because I know there's a lot of questions about, what kind of time does it take? How do you stay motivated to go through the classes and things like that? And I can give you my experience. And then what do you do with all the information that you get? Some folks will just take the foundation courses and start applying it to their systems, either growing it in a homestead or their urban lots. Other folks are farmers and producers that want to be able to take this information and start applying it to their landscape. And then others want to actually get a career in doing consulting or doing lab work and things like that. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And then how did I start my business? Kind of what was my story as far as, getting my business off the ground. And then I'll talk a little bit about where I'm at today. This is going to be, how my business is going and what kind of clients I've seen and where do I see kind of the future of the work that I do. And then as, Keisha and Casey and Nick talked about, what's my advice to you? So we'll kind of go through that as well. All right, next slide. Okay, so how did I discover Dr. Elaine Ingram? It's funny that Keisha brought this up about, where a lot of people actually, or a number of people that I know found Dr. Elaine Ingram was by reading the Teaming with Microbes from Jeff Lowenfels. Elaine wrote the foreword to that book. And it was one of those things where I was at a space in my life where I switched over to growing permaculture systems and I was starting to see major changes, but I didn't understand why. I didn't really, the nuts and bolts of why were these changes happening so rapidly? And why was I seeing? I read basically 5 pages, I think is what the foreword is that Elaine writes in Jeff's book. And it already connected a ton of dots. And so I was like, all right, I need to know who Dr. Ingham is. And I went out and found some YouTube videos and some presentations that she gave and some lectures. And I went, oh, okay, now this is where I really need to understand this at a much deeper level. And that's really how I came about the Soil Food Web School. But backing up a little bit as far as, kind of this progression or this journey for me, is that my wife and I, we purchased a 5-acre homestead in Northern California. And really the goal was for us to be able to grow our own food and raise our own animals and really, be self-reliant and know that we could produce nutritious and good food for us to be able to eat. And I came to it from a very conventional mindset. I grew up on a homestead. My parents were very hardcore homesteaders. We raised animals, we had fruit trees and grapes and berries and a whole bunch of annual vegetables. And I was very comfortable with that homesteading lifestyle. But we came, my parents did, from a very conventional sense where we tilled the soil. We applied fertilizers. We applied all the different sides, pesticides, fungicides, herbicides, and so forth. And I mimicked those techniques when my wife and I bought our 5-acre homestead. And, all I noticed was that every year the production seemed to go down. I had more issues with pests and diseases, and I was having to apply more of these products. And I really, my wife and I both sat down and looked at, some of the labels and some of these products that we were applying into our vegetable gardens. And we're just really kind of horrified at, there are these poisons that we're putting into our food, and then we're turning around and eating that food. This does not make a lot of sense. And we were becoming very discouraged by the pests and diseases and the more work that we had to apply, and the weeds were getting more pressure and all the kind of negative impacts. And so we decided to make a change. And really where I first started this change is I started to understand about permaculture, the design science of multi-species planting and not tilling the soil, and really, kind of looking at that as a systematic approach to solving some of the problems that we were seeing. And in reality, we did see pretty significant changes in a relatively short period of time by applying a lot of these permaculture practices. But for me, I was still missing something. I was still not, having the full picture being exposed to me of why these changes were happening and why was I seeing such good successes. And then that's, the story I started with was by reading the book from Jeff Lowenfeld's, The Teaming with Microbes. That connected so many dots for me. And that just started a whole new, learning project for me. I had to find out more knowledge, and I'm kind of obsessive about learning. When I find a topic that I find a lot of passion about, I just go deep dive into it. And that's when I came across Elaine and just went, oh, okay, I need to really understand a lot more about the soil food web practices. And really at this time frame, I was working in the high-tech industry. My career was working with very large computer systems. And as fulfilling as that was, I really started to find myself spending a lot more time looking and wanting to know more about the soil food web and soil biology and the growing systems and our homestead. And so I was really kind of torn in the space of, spending a lot of my free time, as much as I could, learning and then still working kind of in the high-tech industry. Okay, Adam, next slide. Sorry, folks, I got a little bit of delay here. What inspired me to really kind of do that deep dive in that education, and it really truly came down to seeing the changes in our property, in our homestead, as we saw not just the quality of the food that we were eating. I mean, I went from eating vegetables that, okay, they had flavor, but not great. I didn't really know what I was missing until we really started to change the soil and we really started to change our growing practices. And then tomatoes became amazing. Carrots became amazing. Our grapes were just off the charts good. All the fruit we're producing was insanely delicious. That was one aspect for me that said, okay, yeah, well, we're on the right track. This was our goal, to be able to feed ourselves, and boy, are we feeding ourselves really good food, it felt like. But seeing the ecosystem in our homestead change was another really impactful experience for me. When we were applying all those different chemical pesticides and fungicides and herbicides, and the list goes on, there wasn't that many insects. There wasn't that many birds. I mean, we had turkeys and deer and the things from the natural environment kind of invading into our property, but it still felt devoid. But I didn't realize that. It wasn't until we had a food forest that was kind of right off of our back patio, where we planted plum trees and blueberries and a whole multi-species planting of all these understory plants with mints and bee balms and lemon balms, and the list goes on. I think we had 20 plus different species growing in a very small area. And all of a sudden I started seeing all these predator wasps showing up, mason bees and bumblebees, and then all of a sudden the hummingbird population increased and the butterflies went crazy. And it just seemed like life started to infiltrate into our property. And it provided a different energy in our ecosystem, the way we lived. So it was the food and the quality, but then the change in the ecosystem that really kind of felt like this feels right. It feels like we're kind of growing in a very natural system. And as we started to really, deep dive, there was a lot of these dots, connecting dots as far as, oh, how does this correlate with this? And I see how, this aspect of the change in the soil is impacting, the trees that were growing in those systems. And that's when I really had to find more information. It was, it really kind of deep dive down into the soil food web. Next slide, please. So I went ahead and said, you know what, I want to be able to grow, learn more and really still continue to improve these systems on our homestead. And I became a student. At this point, I still wasn't in the process of saying I want to change careers. I was in the process of saying I want to improve the growing systems, the ecosystem that on our farm, our homestead. So, being a student, the flow course was fantastic. The first part, the Foundation 1 or FC1, was a lot about the science. It gets into how these things actually work, not so much the practical, but going through the science. And I already was thinking, all right, I'm learning these things. I want to start being able to apply them into my property. So I was really tearing through that information. I was trying to watch, multiple classes in a week, just to make sure that I could, absorb this information. And I wanted to get to the practical, how I can really start making these changes. And then when we got to the practical sessions, FC 2 and 3 and 4, which is the, making compost, the compost amendments, both the compost extracts and teas, and then the microscopy, I started to be able to make my own compost, started making my liquid amendments, and I was starting to see changes in a more rapid sense. And so I was able to take what I learned and immediately start to apply it to my homestead. And that was just a fantastic feedback loop. What I thought was good compost before I took the course, I realized what I was really working with was primarily organic matter that was predominantly bacterial based. Most of the compost, after I had gotten a microscope and learned how to use it, I went back and looked at some of the different sources of compost I would get before. I was kind of horrified. I was going, the soil food web is not present in here. It's basically bacteria. Maybe some of the compost had some bacterial predators, but there was no fungus in that compost. And it wasn't until I started making my own compost and really started seeing the textural changes. Keisha mentioned about that compost being sticky. Well, a lot of compost you buy is kind of dry and it's powdery and it's really kind of finely screened. When you make really good biologically complete compost, it's sticky. It needs to be moist. You need to be able to keep those microbes alive. And I realized it smelled different. It looked different. It felt different. It's like, wow, okay, I'm getting that feedback loop as I'm learning this stuff and then also kind of, making it. And then seeing the successes on our homestead really did kind of help me, to learn more. And this was about the time frame when, my wife and I were talking about, let's make a life change. Can we leave our high-tech industry jobs and potentially do this on a much, deeper scale and actually create a business where we can help other people learn how to do these techniques and apply it to their growing systems. All right, next slide, please. So, what did I do with all that information? The first thing, which was the most natural thing, was to produce, high quality food for my family. So we took this information, we applied it. And then the second, like I was mentioning, it started to make me rethink life goals. I love the computer industry. I found it very rewarding. It was fun to work in. I'm a computer nerd at heart, ever since I was a kid. But it became very commoditized, and I was becoming very unhappy with, where I was at. I didn't feel like I was contributing to kind of the greater good of humanity, which was a very big passion of mine. And I looked at this, what I was doing on my homestead and saying, yes, I could do this, I think in a full-time position and on a much, much larger scale. It really kind of, spread what I learned to other folks so that they themselves can be more resilient and self-sufficient, but then also help transform those ecosystems, take what is typically in a traditional agricultural system, a very devoid ecosystem, and start to bring kind of natural systems back into the equation. And so that's when we made a decision. It's time for us to quit our jobs and really to change careers. And once we made that decision, then it was, all right, now we're in the flip the script. We are going to really determine how we're going to make this business sing. Next slide. So how did we start this business? Well, my wife and I sat down and started talking about, well, how are we going to go about doing this? There was some capital costs that we had to go through, which was purchasing all of our lab equipment and getting our brewers and our sprayers and things like that. So we sat down and said, all right, what if we worked the business, our new consulting business, Sprouting Soil, part-time, while we were still working our high-tech jobs, so that we had, some flow coming in or capital to be able to purchase these things. And that's what we did. I ran the business part-time for 2 years before we finally went into a full-time position. We had to sit around, you think about the name of our company, and it was kind of a fun process to say, well, how do we want to represent ourselves? And that's how we came up with Sprouting Soil. But it was a little intimidating too when we first, started our business. It is, I knew from homesteading how to grow things. I mean, I could grow, orchards with fruit trees and nut crops. I could grow grapes. I knew how to grow berry plants, annual vegetables, ornamental plants. There was a lot of experience I learned in the homesteading aspect, but I was very unfamiliar with large scale agriculture. It's a much different beast from a homestead as far as their priorities and the things that they do. So I felt a little bit intimidated at first, talking with these larger growers. But the one way I think I was able to feel comfortable was to start to speak about what I knew, which was the role of soil biology and in growing systems in particular. So I just went out and started speaking at local grower groups, finding a grape growing group or an orchard growing group or, a sustainable agricultural group in the area, speaking at different farm conferences. And my approach was simply just to share knowledge. It was to say, here's what I know about soil biology. And to, basically pass that knowledge on. Well, there was a lot of interest. I could tell from a lot of the questions I was getting from farmers that they themselves were very unhappy about the way that they were growing their products, and seeing some of the same challenges that I saw even on my homestead, which was the reduction in production and the need for more inputs to kind of maintain that productive level, and then fighting with pests and diseases and all those other kind of things. And so there was a kind of a common ground that I felt between my homestead experience and what these farmers were experiencing. And really, by going to these growing groups and providing that knowledge, my business started to grow organically. At this point, I really wasn't even marketing myself. It was just my marketing was to go and share education or share knowledge. Okay, next slide, please. So, where am I at today? Going from starting the business small, working part-time, to then jumping in full-time. And when I first, started the business, I really didn't know what kind of clients I was going to get. Was I going to be more, small scale market gardens or homesteaders or land, residential kind of yards, that type of thing? Or was I going to really, get a lot of large scale agricultural clients, which is really where I wanted to be. I wanted to make big changes on big scale. And I'd say, yeah, I was able to do all of those things. Our business is thriving. There's a lot of convergence points right now that are driving people into wanting to farm biologically and to understand the soil food web. There's the input costs have accelerated because of a lot of global conditions. A lot of farmers are dealing with some very severe pests and diseases, and that they can't control with a lot of the agrochemical I think a lot of farmers are feeling like their margins are getting squeezed and their profit is becoming squeezed, and the viability of being a farmer is in jeopardy. And so they're looking for different ways. So I think that's driving a lot of people into this. And so I'm seeing that in the fact that I'm getting a lot of requests for new clients to either go full bore into doing these things or to find out more about what we do. And I would say my story very matches similar to Nick and to Keisha and Casey about, what kind of clients do I have? They span the gamut. I have residential clients who are just passionate about removing chemicals from their growing systems for their residents. And small scale agriculture, which is market gardens and acre or 2 acres of growing, all the way to very large scale agriculture. I have clients that are servicing upwards of 30,000 acres of orchard land. So it is across the board. And it's agriculture is one aspect of it, but I'm also getting a lot of interest from landscaping companies where they're looking at water restrictions and how do I maintain more water in my systems, because they know that they're going to be getting water restrictions placed upon them, and so they want to be able to build the hydrology in their soil. There are, I'm working with clients that are doing forest restoration, compost production. I think, Keisha and Casey, obviously coming from, owning their own compost business, but even Nick is also looking at compost producers. And same here. There's a lot of compost producers that are starting to see that they themselves can start to create a product that's not just waste reduction, but also a biological product that they can be sold and marketed to folks. And in reality, my marketing's been very limited. I don't go out and push ads and that type of thing. My name is posted on the Soil Food Web School, and I get a lot of business coming from that, but also word of mouth. When I start working with a client, farmers do talk with each other, and you'll have a neighbor of a farmer that I'm working with will be very interested, and we'll start a discussion and to go down that route. So a lot of word of mouth has been kind of driving this business for me. And then the other aspect is, with my business is I have made a big life change of moving from our homestead in Northern California to actually moving up into Oregon. And in fact, I moved on the central coast of Oregon. And it was a big decision for us. Shelby and I had, run our homestead for 20 years, and we had grown a very, very resilient, viable, food producing homestead. But in reality, with the business that I have now, I'm actually traveling quite a bit and spending a lot of time away from the homestead. And the systems that we had in place were just too large for one person to be able to manage. And so we actually, we sold our homestead. We were very lucky that a young family has bought our homestead, and they're very dedicated to maintaining the systems that we've got. And it's funny, I don't hear many people that once they sell your property, do you stay in contact with the people that bought it? But we're in contact with them all the time. In fact, I think we probably communicate with them multiple times a month. They have a lot of questions. Hey, when's the right time to pick these oranges? Or I'm dealing with this kind of issue. What do I do? And we're more than happy to actually help them through that process, because we definitely want to keep that homestead really thriving the way it is. And moving to Oregon's a new set of challenges for me. I'm very familiar with growing my homestead and food production in California, very dry climate, and moving up to the central coast of Oregon, which is a very different climate. And it's kind of fun to be able to learn how to grow in those systems or in that climate versus what I had done down in California. Okay, next slide, please. So what advice would I give to others? A lot of this, I think, is going to match very similar to what Nick and Keisha and Casey had talked about. But, one for me was, join or build a community of like-minded people. It's very hard to feel like you're out there by yourself and not having folks to be able to talk about the things that you're experiencing. And what I've known about, the folks in the soil biology realm is that they seem to be very gracious about their knowledge and sharing what they've learned in their experiences. And I find it like this, we're in a market space right now where the opportunity space is so huge, and there are so few of us doing this, that I feel very, very comfortable that if I can't handle a certain job, or it's an area where, you know, I just can't travel to, or there's another consultant that's in that area that could do, in my mind, a better job, I will by all means, you know, move clients or recommend you know, a potential client to go to them. And I think it's really, you know, I call it co-opetition, you know, where we really need to cooperate with each other and build a kind of a community to really help push this along. And one other thing I would advise to people is don't oversell yourself. It can be very intimidating when you go into a farmer that is a growing system that you don't have any experience with. And I think it is very important for you to be able to tell that farmer or that producer, you know, really that, you know, you may not know how to grow almonds, but you know how to improve soil biology. And I always look at it as I'm going to be in a partnership with my clients. They know how to grow almonds, or they know how to grow grapes, or they know how to grow tomatoes at the scale that they're growing at. I bring a whole nother set of knowledge about how to improve the soil biology and to how to interact their growing systems and make it optimal for the soil biology to thrive. And I really try to approach that with them and saying, hey, we're going to be partners. And, you know, when you'll start to pick up knowledge as you go along. I've been working with almond growers now for quite some time, and so I know the vernacular. I'm knowing a lot about, you know, their production methodologies and so forth. And so every time I pick up a new almond grower, I feel much more at ease about the vernacular that's being discussed, and you know, how these management practices are going to impact the soil biology and so forth. So, you know, just don't oversell yourself and grow into it. You know, that was one of the things that I think Nick had mentioned. It was really kind of find your comfort zone and then move into your knowledge and be able to express that. And another thing that resonated, I think across all of us too, is don't get comfortable in the knowledge that you have. There's always new science. I feel like we are at the tip of the iceberg as far as our understanding about soil biology and the interaction with plants and growing systems. And there's always new science coming across that we need to pay attention to. And I, you know, over, you know, my span of my business, I've been really pushing. Oh, sorry, Elaine. I've been really pushing, you know, learning these new techniques or new science, and then how does that apply to the techniques that we're using. So definitely go out there and start, you know, don't let your knowledge stop. Keep on pushing your knowledge and the education that you are going to pursue in doing a career like this. Okay. All right, that is it for me. So I think panelists, we're going to have you go ahead and go off mute. Oh, just a quick thank you. That's our contact information. So grow@sprayandsoil.com, and there's our phone number as well. So you can always reach out to us. So
well done,
we're going to move. Yeah, thank you. So we're going to move on to Q&A. There's a lot of questions I've seen being posted from you folks, and so we want to have the panelists start to talk about this. So panelists, if you can go off mute, let's jump right into the Q&A questions. All right. So I think this is an old question. You might want to exit out, Adam, presentation mode, and then go back in. I think that will pop up the new ones.
That was actually going to be our first question to answer.
Oh, it was? Oh, shoot. Sorry. I just didn't see it on the list. So let's go back to that one, and we'll ask that one first. And we'll jump into it. My bad. Okay. So this question is from Amarita. And the question is, do you ever give up on changing someone's mindset? Oh, that's a great question, actually. So, panelists, so what say you?
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Elaine.
No, you.
I would say yes, actually. With a lot of this work, I mean, especially as everybody was talking about, like kind of growing organically, is like, you kind of take the people that are coming to you more than spending a lot of your time trying to sway someone's opinion. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, you're never going to change somebody else's mind. They're only ever going to change their own. So if there's no point in wasting your time fighting against somebody, put information out there, talk to large groups of people, large diverse groups of people, and just accept the fact that not everybody's going to agree with you and not everybody's going to change their mind.
Yeah, even when we have people come to us who are excited about changing, you can sometimes tell that there's a lot of questions and they're not fully committed to actually putting in the practices. We were talking with Nick earlier, and it can really get in our way. It can hinder our process if their team, their workers, and themselves, if the client isn't fully committed to these practices, they're not going to have good luck, because there's a lot of little details that they have to follow along with and stay up with. So we don't take every client that comes our way. We try to be selective of who we work with and work with those people who really want to put forth the effort to change.
And I find it very much that way.
Totally.
You don't want to make promises that, oh yeah, we can do this in order to get a client to come on board. It's much better to tell them what we do and how we do it, and case studies, and go to the website and take a look at some of the examples, but then you want to go on to the next person. They'll be back someday. We usually find that's the situation, that if they were a little bit not sure, then when they got around to a year or two later, and some other people local had the examples that this works, then they come on board, and then they'll be successful without driving you crazy.
Right. Yeah, I'd say that where I find most of the challenge to be, if somebody's really not interested in what you're saying, or they want to challenge you, you can easily just say, hey, look, I don't think this is a good fit for you and a good fit for me. Where I find most of the problems about changing people's minds is when you go into a lot of the large scale agriculture, it's usually a team of people. You have the producer, the owner of the farm, but they're going to have their farm managers, their irrigation manager, their PCAs, their agronomists. And sometimes you'll find one person in that group is adamant that what you were saying is wholly wrong, that they are adamant that this is never going to work. And they become kind of, a squeaky wheel in the whole process of trying to make this transition. And a lot of times what I'll tell my clients is that, look, let's all agree upon what data we want to collect, and let's go do a trial, and we'll let the data speak for itself. And if you are able to reduce your costs, and you're able to maintain production, and you're able to, see less pests and diseases, whatever, the conditions are, that is the most powerful way to make those changes. Mm-hmm. And if somebody's still being the squeaky wheel, the grower producer at the end of the day is going to make the decision on who they want to believe. And in some cases, they may decide not to work with that person that's the squeaky wheel anymore. And so that's probably the most difficult spot I find into, is when you have most of the team on board, except for that one person that just wants to, really not want to move their ideology or their mindset. And that can be tough.
I think people have to be ready to change their mind, right? It's not usually a worthwhile endeavor just to kind of decide that you're going to try and change somebody's mind on any given topic. But I like what Brian said about the trial. If somebody is curious, and those are usually the people that come to me. I don't do a lot of marketing or advertising or cold calling of farmers, et cetera. But if someone comes to me and they're kind of unsure, but they want to dip their toe, then a trial is an excellent way to go. A lot of times farmers will come and they'll want to treat their entire production, which is fine. That's great. But if they want to do a trial, try to minimize those compromises, or have no compromises in those treatment groups that you're going to be managing for those clients. Otherwise, you're not really doing the work the way that it works and should be done. So I would echo that. A trial is a good way to sort of start courting a client. And then if you do well with those trials, then you increase, perhaps they adopt that system of management across all their acreage afterwards. So show them, I suppose, instead of trying to convince, right?
Adam, anything else you want to add?
Absolutely. I promise this will only be 1 minute, but I'd love to share something that our audience could go and look at online as well. Has anyone ever seen before the diffusion of innovations model?
Mm-hmm.
This is great. Like one of my favorite things I've ever found in the world. So it's been done. This gentleman, Everett Rogers, worked with a lot of producers in the Midwest in like the 60s and 70s, I believe most of his work was, and developed this model where he saw that a certain percentage of the population are real innovators and they'll try something new in agriculture or really in any kind of technology. And then you have early adopters, and then you tend to have this really tough spot to get over before you start hitting the takeoff point, and the early majority and the late majority comes to the table. So you can look at like the diffusion of Facebook, you can look at the diffusion of television, you can look at the diffusion of radio, right, in a society, and you'll see this curve time and time again. And it sounds to me like that you're saying, Brian, that a lot of times on a team, there's at least one person there that's kind of a laggard that says, I'm not interested in this new idea, or they're very skeptical. I think the nicer term is actually to call this person a skeptic instead of a laggard. But we have to, at some point, you know, all of regenerative agriculture and the soil food web approach and everything that we're doing, we have to make sure that we've got this group of people really succeeding and focus a lot of our attention here before we can cross into that, you know, broader appeal. And it's what you all have mentioned. It's trials. It's, you know, the word of mouth that happens as more people get success with something. It's like a buildup of a critical mass. And so we have to talk to these people and then find ways to reach over into these other categories and just like plant seeds, start cultivating ideas, because none of us wants to spend the next 30 years only talking to this group of people and watch the world continue to be, you know, destroyed by everything else that's going on. We absolutely have to reach this majority group here. We just have to also recognize that there's only so many hours in the day, and we want to talk to first the people that are willing to try something new.
Yeah, agreed. You got to watch out for some people will be highly skeptic, and they want you to spend a significant amount of time before you ever get into an engagement with them about, you know, what's the proof or the science behind it, which, you know, for the most part, I'm willing to spend, you know, a decent amount of time. But after a while, you recognize there's some people that just like, I cannot move the needle, nor do I have the time to, you know, kind of freely give this information out when I could be servicing other clients that are really highly into what we're doing.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
Okay. Shall we go to the next question?
Yeah. Do y'all see this one?
I will in a minute. I'm sorry. My
It says, as a consultant, how much time is spent doing lab work versus time with clients versus time finding clients versus travel, etc.?
Yeah, I'll speak to that one a little bit. I'm sure we can all empathize with this, it being spring, but I've taken on so many samples over the last 2 years during the spring that it leaves little time for much else. And so what I'm currently doing is I'm working with a lab tech at a soil food web, and I'm having them process some of these samples. And I think that's sort of what the intention was of that program from the beginning. But I definitely hit a critical mass. It was more than I could actually handle, you know, pulling in, let's say 7,500 samples in the springtime. That takes substantial time to make all those assessments, write up those reports, and then do any follow-up that is required after. So I've outsourced that a little bit to other people within the organization, and that has allowed me to focus on some of those other areas because there is a lot of travel right now. And I would say that there's a seasonality component to it as well, where for me, I like to focus my travel on spring. Obviously, in agriculture, we're trying, you know, things are growing, things are happening. We've got to get on the program, and we've got to do it within that window, that optimum window. And then fall, getting those fall soil inoculations done, collecting more data, and then making your plan for the following spring.
Agreed. Keisha, Casey?
Yeah, I mean, we spend a lot of time traveling now. Before, you know, when we were just getting started in consultancy, it was a lot of online. I mean, it was COVID, so obviously we were, you know, on the computer mostly and running samples. But now, yeah, we spend a lot of time traveling. It seems like there's not a lot of soil food web consultants, so we in just the state, we can find ourselves driving 7-8 hours a day, once, twice, 3 times a week. So yeah, it definitely depends on the client. That's always our answer. It depends, right? It's
Scientific answer.
Yeah, for me, I did a little bit of a self-inflicted travel because of my move from California to Oregon. So I still have a lot of clients in California. So I definitely do travel down to California quite regularly to make sure that I can get in front of my clients. So travel is definitely something that we see. But I'll just say that I have a lot of clients that are in states very far away where travel is not economical. I've got some East Coast clients, a lot down the South and Midwest, where we will do a lot of Zoom conversations. It's not as rich as being on site, but it's more economical than traveling out in some senses. And I have a feeling that as more consultants come on board, there'll be more consultants in those areas that will be able to service those clients and probably be able to provide to them. But for right now, Zoom, or those kind of platforms are at least helping us in that sense. And as Nick was mentioning too, the amount of soil assessments is huge. Spring is an incredibly busy time. You're looking for the winter months sometimes just to recharge your batteries, because you spend a lot of energy in spring and early summer. And then I don't know if you guys experience this, but there's the late summer lag for me where it tends to just die down in August, early September, and then it picks right back up in fall. And then we have the winter lull for sure. So there's seasonality to some of the work. Now, although I do have other clients though that are doing either some kind of biological studies or compost producers that are run 24/7 or 24/7 or all 365 days a year. That definitely helps out in those slower months. But yeah, it's across the board.
It depends on the crop and how much, it's certainly a fair amount of work for the consultants during the first year, because normally the client is, okay, now what are we going to do? What are we going to do now? And they're expecting to be having to drive their tractor across their land every week, applying something, because that's what they did back when they were using the toxic chemicals. We're working with some large scale growers at this point, and they drive their tractors over the soil 1 to 2 times a week. And that's just crazy. You don't have to do that. Once you get that biology established in the soil, you don't have that time crunch on you anymore. And so much easier to have people moving along, getting more and more of the benefits of the soil food web present. You don't have to work as hard until it comes down to, what are we doing in the springtime to get these seeds planted? What are we going to do in the fall when we've got harvest? What are we doing to set the soil in the fall so it's going to be in shape for in the springtime, and we won't have to do anything in the springtime? So that's kind of the goal, time-wise, I think.
Yeah, and I agree with you. It's interesting, when you're first working with a client, year one tends to be intense because there's a lot of things that you have to educate them on, and there's a lot of management practice changes. By the time you get into years 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, it definitely starts to be less intense and much more prescriptive. It's much more regular in that sense. So, okay, anybody else want to add to this question? All right, Adam, why don't you give us the next one?
All right, this question comes up as, my goal is to work with large farmers in South Texas to move towards regenerative farming. Many of these farmers operate in 5,000, 10,000, 25,000 acres and more. How is it possible to use composting on that many acres?
Yeah, I'll start with that. The large scale ag, it's funny, you get a lot of people that are under the false premise that the practices that we have don't scale for large ag, and that's just not the case. We definitely have a lot of experience now with working on a very large scale. You look at Adam York and what he's doing out in Illinois with Todd Harrington. They have, I think, about 150,000 acres of corn and soybean. under contract and farming with soil food web practices and approaches. And for me, there's a lot of different tools that we can use. Compost is by far the biggest tool that we have available to us to be able to re-inoculate the agricultural systems that are devoid in the biology that supports plants and nutrient cycling and so forth. And using liquid amendments is probably the key thing in a large agricultural system. Making extracts and teas. It's the easiest vehicle to be able to deliver. When you start looking at, if you have to go apply compost to 100,000 acres of land, that's a lot of compost that physical compost to be able to try to cover that amount of land. Where if we can make it into a liquid amendment, we can definitely distribute it much easier, much more efficiently as well, through the irrigation systems. It's a fantastic way to be able to take an irrigation system farmers already using, and now we can apply our compost extracts into the soil through that system. It makes the large scale systems really work. And the one thing I think in that, it's not just applying the biology as well, it's also getting the farmers to change their management practices to being beneficial to the soil biology, not harmful. Tilling is a perfect example of that's a management practice that we just got to get away from. We got to stop tilling. And every time we start to disturb the soil like that, we're setting ourselves backwards. And so there are a lot of no-till systems now, and farmers are becoming much more knowledgeable about, I don't think I have to till, and it will work. So, all right, that's my 2 cents. Anybody else want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, when we're looking at at scale, these farmers already have a lot of the machines that we need to get the material out. So for us, it was a shock, but working with larger scale farmers has been far easier than convincing, small landholders. Because often when you're working with someone who's just getting started out, looking at $1,000 brewer and all the pumps and spray units is just, it's over their head. It's so much money. But, you go to a farmer and say, hey, you need to spend $4,000 on an extraction unit. They're so used to, spending $160K plus on these giant machines. And so as they're, like Elaine was saying, they're driving these tractors so many times over their land. When you're telling them, we're actually going to reduce the amount of time that you have to be out there on your tractor. Maybe you can even sell some of the other equipment. It's no problem to get them to, update the machines they have and just trade the chemicals out for compost tea or extract.
Yeah, I've had to navigate this a few times. I think we've seen some consultants like Todd putting down as little as 2 gallons to the acre in furrow on some of these corn and soy crops. It's great when I can put down 20 gallons on an acre because it's a smaller project, but that's not always a possibility. Like Brian said, I think a lot of farmers assume you need to put down a ton or 2 per acre of compost, but the reality of the situation is with a ton of compost, you could treat 50, 75, 80 acres, depending on the quality of that compost. And so for some of these larger pieces of land down in South Texas, and I've talked to some ranchers down there about this and sort of troubleshot this a little bit with them, but even treating seed can be a very effective way to get out into those areas that you're really trying to focus on. And if you can do extract on top of that, that's great. Other things we've done, we've taken manure that they have, we mix smaller amounts of the biocomplete compost into the manure, and we spread it out on pasture in the fall that way. If they're doing rotational grazing, all the manure is already out there where it actually belongs. But if they have stockpiles of manure and a large piece of land, that's just one other thing one other technique to think about. So treat the seed, mix with other compost or manure. And if you have good biocomplete compost, I mean, you could be, treating 50, 75 acres with a single ton of that compost.
Yeah. And I think the biggest challenge that we're running into, the big headwind for us is getting the compost producers on board to make compost at scales that we need it. I mean, really, that to me right now is one of the biggest limiters. I feel very lucky that a lot of my clients are in California, so I can reach out to Keisha and Casey and say, hey, look, I got a client, I need to get compost. And I feel very, very satisfied that, I'm able to provide that. But I have, clients in North Texas that are having a hard time, clients that are in Utah that are having a hard time, finding good compost. So we need more compost producers to be making biologically complete compost. That is definitely a challenge that I see.
Yeah. The interest there is definitely increasing though. I'm getting more calls from
Yeah.
composters, and like I said, it's got to be part of the mission right now for the few of us there are. We need more of this material. It is the conduit to do this work, and it's very scarce. So if there's, if we do some preliminary chatting about what they're doing and what they're willing to change, and it looks good, like I'm gonna jump all over that project for sure.
Same, yeah. I get it. My interest from folks, from compost producers in making a biologically complete compost is definitely high, and I think we're also getting in connection with some of the right folks. We're starting to make good inroads with the Association of Compost Producers, where they're very committed to telling their constituents that we need to really start looking at making biologically complete compost. And so I think the word is getting out, and there's a market that's evolving that the compost producers are seeing and going, okay, that's something I have to pay attention to. There's a product I can make. So,
yeah.
All right. Anybody else want to add to this question before we move on? Okie dokie. Adam, next question.
Why should a company hire me for a regen ag role, someone with basic agricultural experience and a huge passion for regen ag, but no working experience in regen ag, over someone who is less passionate but has more specific experience?
That's a great question.
Yeah, we really want to, well, when you're going through the training courses with Soil Food Web, we require that you are going to make the compost and be successful at making compost at a small scale. But what you discover is, as you up the quantity of starting materials, it's actually easier to deal with a windrow than it is with pitchforks and shovels in your compost in a wire cage. So scaling up is not that difficult. Yeah, there are things you have to pay attention to, but we teach you about that. We teach you to make the teas and the extracts and to do the different kinds of applications. And then you have to go through your PhD degree, if you will. Here's the situation where you really need to know and understand how to take samples and run those samples, get the reports, make those reports. So we give you a mentor that takes you through this whole process of converting dirt back into soil. So you're confident that you know what you're doing. You can, go back and practice on your, your lawns or on your homestead or on a neighbor who is a farmer. So a lot of times you can ask them to give you 100 by 100 feet or, a half an acre or a whole acre if you're feeling up to it. And so you get to practice perhaps for a year or two before you take the deep dive and start to accept true clients where you're going to be working with them, and you're going to make certain, by looking through your microscope, you've got to learn how to figure out whether what you just added is still alive, or there was glyphosate put on this field once upon a time. Are all my organisms dying because the glyphosate's still there? It's not decomposed at all. And so you learn all of those things going through the courses. So feel assured that we're not sending you out there with very little knowledge. You're going to have a lot of knowledge, regardless of whether you got your PhD from land grant school or something like that. You'll have the ability to do this job.
And let me jump right in there as well, because I did have a PhD when I started here 7 months ago, and Elaine taught me so much from the foundation courses and from interacting with her. And even, like, I'm embarrassed to say that the whole concept of like the steps that go into fixing a broken soil ecosystem, I had never, in 15 years, I had never really put all of that together or had anybody help me put it together. And in this elegant way where Elaine says, hey, you have to know what's there. That means microscopy skills. And you have to identify what's missing, what should be there, so that you can make a strategic plan to put back the right kinds of compost that will bring back the thing that is missing. And then you have to learn how to make those compost elements or the biocomplete amendments and how to apply them. And these are all like, there's so many levels of knowledge that goes into this, it can seem overwhelming. But it always comes back to things like the microscopy skills that we teach at the Soil Food Web School, because you have to monitor that soil food web. You have to constantly touch base with it. You have to align your other management practices and understand, when I do this, thing, I see that the amoebae kind of disappear out of the soil or take a hit. So I need to change that management practice so that it doesn't have that negative influence. And it's like, these steps are set forth in the foundation courses, and they are not set forth in academia. Because I've been there, and that was an element of my education that was missing.
Agreed.
Yeah, I think that the regenerative agriculture space is kind of in that unique position right now, where you don't have a lot of people who have work experience necessarily in regenerative agricultural practices. They're in the systems that typically would support those work experience kind of things aren't there. They're usually coming from academia, from the university systems, to doing interns and then getting experience before you get hired into a farm. And so I think knowledge is the key thing right now. Having the knowledge about regenerative agriculture, and there is a high demand for that knowledge. There's just not a lot of people who have necessarily the work experience, so people are still getting hired to be able to do that work. And I think until academia really catches up, we're going to kind of be in that unique kind of space where folks can be saying, yeah, I can't find anybody who has work experience necessarily, but let's go ahead and take a chance on you that necessarily somebody has knowledge. And that's, when I approached, getting into this consulting aspect of it, I didn't know, about large scale agriculture and the processes and things like that. So, you just take a different tact. I had to express to my clients that, hey, I know what I know, you know what you know, let's merge those two things together and make it work. So
I would say also just kind of practically, one reason that they might choose you over someone else is because you're closer, and because you might be cheaper. So, when you get started as a consultant, like, you don't go hard with your price. It's not like your first client, you're charging $150 an hour. When we got started, we charged a lot less than what we do now. And a lot of the times we would be going to Brian, going to, consultants who have more experience than us, especially if we're working with, like, if I go to work on nut crops or grapes, I'm going to call Brian and, get some of his time. And so, sometimes people, there's all kinds of folks in the world, but a lot of people really like to support people that have passion and want to learn. And for them, it feels really good to meet somebody who doesn't know everything, who isn't the expert, but that they feel like they can be a part of your journey. And so we had a lot of people take a chance on us in the beginning and say, hey, okay, you don't have a lot of experience in this. You're just getting started. I'm still going to be kind and pay you to do this work. And so as you move through, the process of being a consultant, you start to get your feet about you and start to understand what you're doing. You don't oversell yourself, like Brian said. And eventually it becomes very natural to raise your price because you don't have time anymore. And you do become that expert. And so, you got to start somewhere. And I think a lot of farmers understand that and will support that journey, especially if you're forward.
Sure.
Well said. Yeah.
You've
got, it takes some time to build it, but certainly like your time becomes very scarce. And then that is when, your income can hopefully increase to some degree. And it takes a little bit of time, but I would also say that if you think of like permaculture and biodynamics, you don't see a lot of that in the university realm. This is, that is agriculture too. There's crossover with agriculture, but there are so many citizen scientists and practitioners that don't have degrees within those spaces. And all of this that you're learning in Soil Food Web School crosses over into that and just adds a synergy to that. And so, if it's not just a 10,000 acre monocrop, look at the permaculture properties, look at the people that are wanting to homestead and build food forests and all those kinds of things. Look at composting, being a lab tech, etc. I think there's a lot equipment, I find myself modifying equipment at every single job. There's better equipment now than when I first started, but there's so much room to develop tools and equipment for this work. So, I feel like, there aren't enough of us consultants, but there's just so much else that can be done within that realm. Don't limit yourself to just sort of these conventional ag crops that maybe you want to see go in another direction.
Right. Great. Okay, Adam, let's take another question.
This one was to Keisha and Casey. Do you guys make compost out of only organic ingredients? And if so, how easy is it to find large amounts of organic matter to turn into compost for your business?
You want to start?
Yeah, so no. In order to produce organic compost, not every single one of your ingredients has to be organic. It's more about the process in which you compost. But that being said, we go to very, very painstaking lengths to make sure that we are sourcing the cleanest ingredients we can. And if we do, like, say, have to purchase hay or something like that, we do buy organic. But it doesn't have to be. We literally, that was like the first year of our job, was just trying to find resource channels that are clean and not contaminated. Finally, like a horse farm that we go to, it happens to be like an organic horse stable, and they don't worm and they don't do all these other things. They don't have the horses don't have access to salt blocks and things like that, so you don't get a lot of salt coming out in the manure. So yeah, sourcing the materials can be difficult, but yeah, it definitely doesn't have to be organic.
That's a little trick. When you go to the store and you see a bag of compost and it says organic on it, you feel like, oh, wow, like this is good, clean stuff. It's not. You can take organic compost and get it tested and find all kinds of just crazy chemicals in it. Mm-hmm. In the composting industry, when they reference organic, they're referencing temperature thresholds, and that is it.
Nutrient.
Yeah, so it's, we do grow all of our own green materials, or we actually have, like, now we've connected with lots of other people in our area that are happy to treat their hay with compost tea and compost extract. They're happy to not add any fertilizers and to sell us their hay at a high price. We've found that if we want people to treat their waste materials in the way we want, that incentivizing that for them by giving them more money than anyone else would has been really helpful. And it does reflect in the price of the compost. But the thing is, if you get manure that's got a lot of fresh anti-wormers in it, you're not going to see nematodes in your pile. If you're getting compost green materials that are covered in fungicides, you're not going to see good fungal components in your compost. And for us, if we don't see those things, we lose money, we lose time. It's a waste. So we put a lot of our energy into making sure our materials are as clean as possible. But yeah, organic certified wood chips, the only way you're going to get that is from a orchard that's organically certified, that's chipped. And then you are only single source wood chips, which is a big no-no in our industry. We like diversity. So I'm yet to find diverse organic wood chip inputs, but who knows, in the future, there might be, there might be a job for someone to do that, produce that. So keep our ears open.
Hopefully we get feedback loops, right? That as more people start to adopt these practices, the more the material, the residues left over on farms, kind of fit that mold. And so hopefully over time, those feedback loops will then just reinforce, the compost that's being made. So.
Well, the whole industry calls.
All right, any panelists, you want to add anything? Oh, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say the whole industry calls these materials waste products, and it's funny because you go out to your green bin and you get rid of your waste and you feel really good about it, and then someone comes and picks it up, and they make tons of money off your waste because organic materials are the most important resource that we have on the planet, or one of them at least. I guess it's debatable, but in my world, organic materials are what make all life go round. So stop thinking of them as waste and start treasuring every bit of organic material that you can get your hands on if you're going to be a compost producer.
They're food. They are organism food. So you want the cleanest, best stuff, but still don't call it a waste. We got to get off that little, waste management incorporated.
They're clever.
Yep.
Yeah, and I would add in an additional warning about, especially if people are sourcing manures from locations where the animals are given a lot of antibiotics, especially some industries like poultry. Now, poultry traditionally had used a lot more antibiotics, and some of the big companies are not allowing that anymore. But there still is in a number of industries a lot of antibiotic use, and we could actually see the genes for antibiotic resistance being transferred around in the environment. And we get our compost hot, but we don't get it hot enough to denature DNA. And so it's just something to be really aware of, that there are some typical practices out there in the agricultural world that can create problems for us on this side.
Since we're throwing out warnings, I guess I could throw out as well is they salt cure hay sometimes. If it's going into large barns, they will layer salt in between each layer, so your compost or your hay will come super salted. Or in order to cut it early and bale it quicker, they'll spray it with preservatives so it doesn't mold when they bale it wet. And so that way they can bale it faster.
And so,
they have organic versions of that same preservative as well, so they can sell it as organic hay.
Yeah, they call it dry down. Sometimes they will use glyphosate for that, just right at harvest, so you can drop it in the field. So be mindful of that. Be mindful of that.
Look into the past history of your starting materials. Find out what's really been done, because you put together a windrow and it just won't heat. It won't heat. And you do have to finally figure it out, because that's a lot of starting materials. That's a significant amount of money. You've got to fix this problem. So ask questions.
Okay, I'll put up another question here for us.
I think we've got time for one more. Let's shoot for one more question here.
So Keith says he doesn't have a formal degree and wonders if this would still be a viable option for him to pursue as far as creating a career.
I don't have a degree.
I almost made the mistake of going and getting a degree. Sorry, that was a joke, but I feel confident for education.
I have a degree in information systems management. It has nothing to apply to what we're doing here. So I think we showed that a few. Now, granted, we're buffered by PhDs in the school, right? So people that have degrees in microbiology and so forth. But to do a career, you have to have a passion, and you have to have ability to learn, and you need to be able to be somebody who will spend time and understand the science for sure.
Yep, you've got to be able to think. And when you look out in a field and you can see XYZ problems, you've got to come up with the best, most effective means of dealing with those problems rapidly, so that your clients are going to be impressed with what you can do for them. So you don't have to, a college degree would be enlightening, I guess, but not an absolute necessity.
Brian, it was like Brian said earlier, you're one of these people who obsessively studies and goes after your education on your own. This is just the perfect program, because it for me, not being traditionally educated, it really taught me how to think, how to go about critical thinking for these big projects, how to think it through start to end, how to debate with people who have been traditionally educated, and it does feel good to be able to sit in a room of PhDs and have a thoughtful conversation and not, feel like I'm lacking something. So the program really does that for you, and especially if you put your effort in. Now, I will also say that I know I have some friends that got in, and they do this thing where they get on and they just go. They'll put in 2 or 3 workshops, listening to Elaine in a day, and they just don't take the information up. So it's not like just because you watch the foundation courses, you are going to succeed. That is not true. You have to apply yourself. You have to try, and it is difficult. It's not an easy program. It's not like you're just going to fly through and ding, you're a soil scientist, but get started.
Yeah, it takes effort on your part to put it all into your own way of explaining the food web. What are the bacteria and fungi down here doing? And what are the protozoa and nematodes and microarthropods and earthworms and incatriids and, macro arthropods and spiders and, chimpanzees and human beings? Where do they belong, and how do nutrients cycle through all of these different kinds of organism groups in that food web? So gotta think.
Yeah. And I think, another way is also changing the way you think. I mean, a lot of going through, my college education in the high tech career, there's a lot of reductionist thinking when we're really also talking about complex systems thinking. It's a different way of saying, I don't want to get down to just maybe the narrowest part of it. I want to see how all these interactions work, and thinking in the complex systems is a way to start to change your own mindset about how you learn.
I would echo that as well. I think.
All right. Anybody else want to add anything to this?
I think it's
reductionist.
Go ahead.
In the within academia, and you don't see these big picture concepts, and the fact that everything is connected. You don't see a lot of collaboration between the soil scientists and the ecologists, and so you don't necessarily get that kind of curriculum, but you do here. And I've gone through it all. I've been in post-grad research and worked on a bunch of different publications and on research and experiment station farms. And I didn't get this until I'd exposed myself to it a little bit in college, but until I did these classes, I did not have that big picture mindset. I knew it existed, but I just didn't know where all the pieces fit together. And we're still learning that. Certainly we don't have a handle on all of it, but we do know enough to make a difference, and that's what matters.
It's just been in the last couple of years, for example, that we've added 2 whole new overarching principles onto our list. Just in the last 3 or 4 years, we've added 2 more to the list. So we have 7 overarching principles. 5 years ago, we only had 5 overarching principles. When are we going to discover number 8 that needs to go on the list, or 9 or 10? As we're looking at the interactions of all of these organisms, it's just incredible what they do together. And you really need specialists, if you will, in all of these groups that are potentially useful, because you've got to understand things at that level to really put the picture puzzle together. I kind of think of what I've been doing for my whole career is working on figuring out the framework of this picture puzzle called nutrient cycling on planet Earth. And now we've got to start filling in all the in-betweens. And when we do that, we're going to discover that there's things that ought to go this way. And there are organism groups that will go out in different directions and tie it all together. We have only begun. There's so much yet to do.
Yeah.
We're not going to get bored.
The field of mycology, I think, is a great example. There's just so many independent, people without degrees that are out there doing breeding, doing bio and micro remediation work. A lot of the phylogeny and where that's come from, and what we know about mushrooms did not come from academia. It came from foragers and independent researchers, etc. So don't limit yourself with that kind of thinking. You're capable of working alongside all of these people that maybe you're concerned about, and you're definitely capable of working with these farmers who need some help understanding these overarching principles.
Sure. You look at Paul Stamets and Peter McCoy, right?
Exactly.
pioneers, leaders in their fields for sure.
Well, and I know that we have to go soon, or we got a minute
Okay.
left.
Shall we close this? I think we're at a wrap here, folks.
You keep missing Adam.
You know what?
Brian and I we're talking at the same time, but I did want to say, like, there's one kind of pop education term that I could bring up here that encompasses what everybody has said, which is bring a growth mindset to the table. Whatever your educational background is, come in and with curiosity. Come in excited about increasing your own capacities and increasing your own knowledge base, and you can be successful over time.
And learn how to use Excel and Google Drive.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's where we were really lacking. Don't go toe to toe with PhD or Excel spreadsheet. I tell you what, they know all the tricks.
I will say that I've had to build a lot of spreadsheet models in the last 2 years, and I never really saw that as being a component of this work. But you make a couple, it's fairly basic. I mean, at least the basic functionality of it. But don't be intimidated by it. It's just some simple formulas and helps you manage your data and can help you sort of smooth out some of your standard operating procedure, or your clients for that matter. So, but true that.
Yeah, I feel lucky in the fact that that's why I spent 20 years in my career with information system stuff. And so I never thought I would actually use any of that knowledge when I went here, but I was like, oh my gosh, yes. Thank you.
Brian, you make a mean slideshow. It's true.
Okay. All right. Hopefully. Yes. I'm a PowerPoint jockey, that's for sure. Okay, well, I apologize for my delay. Hopefully I didn't cut anybody else off, but I think we're at a wrap here. Adam, you want to throw up the last slide for me? And too funny. So while we're waiting for the last slide to pop up, it concludes our April promotion and our webinar series. And so I definitely want to give a shout out, thank people behind the scenes. There are a lot of people who work for the Soil Food Web that really make this happen and make it sing. So for all the people working behind the scenes, I want to thank everybody. Also want to thank all the panelists. Nick, Keisha, Casey, and Adam. It's been great to be able to have that dialogue and conversation back with you folks. And as obvious, we want to give lots of thanks to Dr. Elaine Ingham for her decades worth of service and support into helping educate minds and also be a mentor to all of us, so we can do the good work. So I want to give thanks to everybody.
Yep, and thank you, Brian, for hosting this, and all of the panelists, everybody, and the behind the scene group too as well. All very important in getting this knowledge out to people. What are you telling secrets over there?
We're always up to something.
Yep.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay.
Yeah, everyone.
Well, we'll conclude.
Ciao.
Bye, everybody.
Till next time.
Don't forget to click that like button, subscribe to our channel, and ring the notification bell to stay updated with all our new videos.